This video is sponsored by Squarespace. If you need a website, a domain or an online store, make your next move with Squarespace and use the discount code AndrewMarr. G'day there guys. A couple of weeks ago I shared a video about my trip down to Pemberton. You gave me some fantastic feedback. You told me that the last image that I took in that video was your favourite. The majority of you did anyway. So happens that it was my favourite image as well from that trip. So in this video I'm going to quickly show you how I edited that shot and hopefully give you a couple of tips and tricks and little strategies of how I edit woodland photography or woodland images as part of the video. About a month ago I put out a video about 3 myths that a lot of people have when it comes to editing landscape images. So if you haven't checked that out, I'll put a link in the description below and I'll probably put a link up here as well. So this is the image here. As you can see, the shadows are quite long. This was shot first thing in the morning, just after I got out of the tent. I pretty much was just exploring this area and just enjoying the forest with a cup of coffee that I'd made. Wasn't really intending to take an image at all, but I just saw this scene and just couldn't go past it, so I had to run back to the car, grab my stills camera and come back and take this shot. So yeah, the shadows are quite long. The sun has only just really got up, but you can see through the center, through to the trees in the background there, you can see this beautiful golden light landing on those trees, and then more in the midground you can see the light coming through the trees, or the leaves in the trees, just at the top there, which is really nice. Now I've edited it to kind of bring out that in the image, and I'm going to show you the kind of technique that I used in Lightroom to do that. So let's go to the image here. This is the image raw, straight out of camera, and as you can see, in comparison to the first one, it is a lot bluer. So obviously I did a little bit to the image to kind of bring out the golden colors that were actually there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you the different steps that I took to do that. So you can start editing it like this, as a raw, straight out of camera. Or what I like to do is go over to the white balance, and under as shot, I go to auto and see what Lightroom thinks of the shot and balancing up that white balance. Now, Lightroom looks like it has warmed it a little bit. I would just like a little bit more warmth, because as you can see, it's still fairly blue. So I'm going to bring that up, maybe not too far. Look, that'll do, round about 5,700. I'll leave the tint as it is, and then I'll come down to the tone auto, and I'll click that as well, because what that will do is it will change some of these top adjustments automatically, and that's a lot better. Now that's not cheating, it's just a different starting point. Sometimes I click on auto and I don't like it, so then all I do is I double click on tone and that just takes it off again, and I'll start editing here. But as you can see, clicking on auto gives you a far better starting point, and then I adjust from here, or I certainly will with this image anyway. So that's looking pretty good, but you can see just in the center here, those highlights are pretty high, and also on the corner here in the top right hand corner. So I'm just going to grab the highlights and just bring them down even a little bit further, 75, 80, something like that. Just to bring out a little bit more, or take down a little bit more of the highlights. But that's looking pretty good. Now normally I'd hop straight into the texture, clarity and dehaze, but I'm going to leave that because I'm actually going to adjust them with a different type of adjustment. So we're going to leave that, and we're going to go straight down to vibrance and saturation. I'm going to leave saturation where it is, but I am going to pump the vibrance up just a little bit. You can see it's just bringing a little bit more of those greens in. The difference between vibrance and saturation is saturation saturates all the colors right across the image, and in that way even sometimes introduces some colors, so you don't want to do that. Vibrance kind of identifies where the colours are strong and makes them a little bit stronger. So it's a little bit more targeted. So I like to slide the vibrance up just a little bit rather than the saturation. When it comes to saturation, I'll come down to this next panel here, which is the colour panel. There's the hue, which I'll leave. There's the saturation, which I'll start off with. And this allows me to control each of the channels, each of the saturation of each of the channels individually. Because there's no reds or magentas or purples in here, I'm going to leave those channels. That's the beauty about this panel. I just want to move pretty much 2 channels, which is going to be the yellows and the greens, and they're pretty much going to affect similar parts. The yellows quite often affect the greens as well, but in a slightly different way. So I'm going to just slide this yellow back and forward. I'm going to have a look at where that is affecting the image. And as you can see, it's affecting those leaves there. So look, I'm just going to bring that up to somewhere between 20 and 30. I don't want to overdo it. That there looks pretty good to me. And then I'm going to bring the greens up, probably not as much, because I just don't want to overdo those greens and make them kind of plastic looking. So I'm going to leave that at probably closer to 20 than 30. How's that? So after that, I'm going to go across to the luminance. Now what this does is it brightens those channels, or those colours. And again, I'm only going to be concentrating on the yellow and the green. So again, I'm going to bring that yellow up and move it around first just to see which part of the image it's affecting. Again, it's affecting those lights, the leaves, sorry. So I'm going to not overdo it. Maybe just above 20 looks pretty good to me. And then the greens, again, I don't want to overdo it with the greens as well. Otherwise, yeah, they just get a little bit too green. The beauty about bringing up the luminance on the greens is I find that it gives the greens a little bit more definition, a little bit more depth. So that's what I like about bringing the greens up. But again, not overdoing it. I'll just bring it up slightly higher than the yellows. By the looks of it, that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so once I've done that, they are the adjustments that I'm doing kind of globally. It's affecting pretty much all of the image. Now what I want to do is start looking at some more targeted adjustments using these filters or tools across the top here. So the first tool I'm going to use is the ellipse tool. I don't think I'll just zero all of these out. I just double click the label and it'll just zero all of them out. So I've got nothing set there. And then I'll create quite a large circle. And what I'm trying to do is get pretty much the top half of the image, but as a bit of a curve. And the reason why I'm doing it as a bit of a curve, I'm going to be bringing in some warmth here. I don't really want to be bringing too much warmth down the bottom. I really want to be targeting the top half. And again, I don't want to be, I can see this kind of natural curve that it has, that the image has. So I'm going to follow that with the ellipse tool. Now I could use a graduated filter here and just bring it straight down, but that would be more of a flatter adjustment. So I'm going to keep it as, well, that's why I'm using an ellipse tool here. And I'm going to invert it. And now if I hover over the center of it, you can see in red that it's the center of the ellipse. If I hadn't inverted it, it would be the outside of the ellipse that would be affected by the adjustment. So I'm going to click the invert. It's going to be the inside of the image, and you can see that it's going to be pretty much the top half with a little bit of a curve there as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to bring in some of the warmth. Probably just above 20 is looking pretty good. I'm going to bring down the highlights again because I can still see plenty of highlights in the top right hand corner here, and again just these leaves in the center and right at the top of the image. So I'm bringing the highlights down as well, a fairly good amount, yeah, somewhere between 40 and 50 is looking pretty good. I'll leave it there. I'm going to bring up the shadows. Now that's just going to bring up some of these little darker areas just within the forest and around this bench. So I'll bring these shadows up, maybe to 20, maybe a little higher, 25, 27. That's looking pretty good. So I'm getting a little bit more detail just in the darker parts of the forest here. And then the warmth, I'm wondering whether just to pull that up just a little bit more. How's that? That looks good. Let's leave it there. Okay, next I'm going to add another ellipse. And again, it's going to be a reasonably large one, pretty much in very much the same area. I might just bring this down a little bit more. Okay, so around about there. Now with this ellipse, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to adjust the texture and the clarity. So what I'm trying to do with the image is where the golden light is coming through those leaves and making them a little bit translucent, and also the areas where the golden light is bouncing off the leaves and the bark of the trees, I'm trying not to over sharpen that area. In fact, I'm trying to make that just a little bit more softer. So I could do that with the textured sliders. Now normally you slide them to the right and bring in a little bit more structure and texture with the texture and clarity. But that's not going to look good in this image. It makes it too contrasted. So in actual fact, what I want to do is I want to bring these sliders back a little bit and make it a little bit softer. You can see in the center there how it's making it a little bit softer, and that's exactly the sort of thing that I want. Now I think the texture is going to look good roughly there, maybe just a tad more, and then the clarity is probably not as much. So I'm sliding it back and forward. You can see what it's doing to the image, and it's affecting all of the top half. We'll get to that in a second. It's probably overdone it, so I'm just going to back it off a little bit more. So maybe just under 20 there. I just might bring the texture down a little bit further. So that's pretty good. Now the problem, of course, is that even though I've got the ellipse, so therefore that effect is only happening at the top half of the image, it's affecting everything. It's affecting the bark, the trunks of the trees, the leaves on the ground. It's affecting the park bench, everything. And I really only want that effect to take hold on the lighter parts of the image. So I'm going to come down to the range mask, and I could either choose color and target a certain range of color, or luminance. I'm going to use luminance because I'm going to target just the highlighted parts within the top half of the image. So I'm going to bring the range up so that it's only affecting the top half. And if you look at the image there, you can see it only affects those lighter parts or brighter parts. I'm going to leave that at around about 50-ish, maybe just bring it up a little bit higher. Yeah, that's looking pretty good there. So that's looking really good. And you can see that effect, that kind of softening effect, is only affecting the highlighted parts, the brighter parts in the top half of the image, where those leaves are. Either the light is reflecting off them or is being pushed through them, which is really, really beautiful. The next thing I'm going to target now is the bottom part of the image. You can see this area down the bottom. It's a little bit distracting, and when I took the image, my intention was always to probably crop this part out. So I'm going to come up to the crop tool, and the original crop would have been a 3:2. I'm going to come down to 16:9. It's a bit of a favorite crop of mine, particularly for these kind of landscape type images. I find it a little bit nicer than the 3:2 for some images, and it's not as extreme as the panos, the 2:1s or the 3:1. So 16:9 is looking pretty good. Now I can pull that up and have the bench in the middle. That's bringing in a little bit more of the foreground. I've got this root here, which it's not really doing too much. But what I'm more concerned about is I'm losing up the top here quite a lot of those leaves, and they're a really good part of the image. So I'm going to pull the image up, or pull the crop up, so I'm getting more of that in the image. I've cut this little root out here, and that's a lot better. You can look at the bit that I'm cutting out, and it really is quite boring. I'm not really missing anything here, so I'm quite happy with that crop. We'll click done there. Okay, so that's looking better. I've cropped out that part of the image down the bottom, but I still don't want the viewer's eye to be so attracted to this bottom part. It's not really interesting, but it's got a little bit of light hitting it. And what I want to do is darken this part of it down and really accentuate this middle section, this bit where you've got the warm light coming through and it's a little bit brighter. So I can do that really easily with a graduated filter. I'm just going to, from the bottom, pull it up. It's a little bit crooked, so all I'm going to do is put my finger on the shift key as I pull it up, right about there. And then I'm just going to come over to the exposure and just wind down that exposure until I'm happy with it, which is about there-ish. So I'm not darkening it too much, just darkening it a little bit. So what's that, about 1.6 of a stop. I'm not making it completely dark, but it's just taking the eye off this foreground and making sure that it is pushed through to where the park bench is and where the light is. That's perfect. So at this stage, this is pretty much what the scene looked like. It had this beautiful kind of glow to it, this morning glow, as the light was coming through and hitting these leaves. And I've pretty much got the image that replicates what that morning looks like. Now what I'm going to do is just accentuate certain parts of the image just to direct the viewer's eye just a little bit more to the area and give them a little bit of a sense of what the scene looked like and the feeling that I had when I was there. So to do that, I'm going to add another ellipse tool, and this time I'm going to turn it around, just push it back a little bit. I'm going to use this almost like a shaft of light. It's going to be fairly subtle, so the viewer's not really going to know. I'm just going to push that back there, bring it down a little bit. So it's quite a large area. Of course, if I hover over, it's the outside that's being affected, so I'll make sure that I invert it. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to push the temperature up a little bit. And so I'm just keeping an eye on that center, making sure that I'm not pushing it too far. Yep, look, that's looking pretty good. I probably could go to 20, but I'll stop there at, what's that, about 18. I'm looking at that center part of the image and making a judgment from there. And that's just bringing through a little bit more of those golden colors. It's also creating a little bit of golden color down here on the moss that's growing on the path out towards the bench there. So that is looking pretty good to me. I'll click done there. The next thing I want to do is just bring a little bit more attention to that park bench. And so I'll use another ellipse tool here. I'll just pull it out just in the center here, and just so that it's just touching the tree trunks here as well. Now I do this quite often where if I want the viewer's eye to go to a specific place in the image, I'll just brighten it up just a little bit. Just a nice subtle effect just to draw the viewer's eye to that spot. And of course in this image what I want them to do is explore the forest around them, but their eye is eventually going to land on the golden light and also the park bench there in the center. So I'm just going to give that a little bit of a lift, bring up the exposure a little bit, and also probably bring in a little bit of warmth. Probably don't want to bring it in, have it that high. So I'll make sure that the ellipse is inverted, so it's affecting the inside of the ellipse, and then I'll bring up the temperature. And again, I'm just keeping my eye on that center part of the image around the park bench, and you can see that that's probably overdoing it, so I'm just going to back it off. Probably around about 10 is going to be fine. I'll bring up the exposure just a fraction. Again, just subtly bringing in just a little bit more light there. And then I'll finish it off by bringing up the shadows, which means that it'll only affect the darker areas just under the log and the park bench. That'll probably do. Maybe I can just push it just a fraction more. So again, not overdoing it, just bringing up these layers slowly but surely. You can always go back and adjust any one of these layers, but I always try and do smaller increments of adjustments and just build the image up over time. So that is pretty much it. All I've really got to do is, if I just close that panel, I haven't added any sharpening, so depending on where I was going to use this image, I'd bring in some sharpening. So let's just have a look. I'll grab this tool here. I'll make sure that I'm looking at a part of the image that I was focused on. So these leaves here, and I'll just bring up the sharpening amount. Yeah, probably around about 70, 75, somewhere there. And then with the mask, I'll just have my push the option and bring up the masking and just take out some of those darker areas. So I'm looking at the log near the bench, I'm looking at the tree trunks. I'm making sure that I'm not bringing in too much sharpening or in those darker areas, otherwise it's just going to introduce noise. So around about there is pretty good. So the final step will be to bring in some vignetting. You can see the natural vignetting that this image has, and I really do love that. It's also got some natural framing with the trees on either side. It's got the branches and the leaves over the top of the image, and then the path down the bottom. And of course we've already introduced a little bit of vignetting effectively by bringing in that graduated filter with a reduced exposure there. So I'm just going to bring in the vignetting. Probably around about 15 is actually going to be fine. And then I'll bring the midpoint in as well. Now sometimes what I'll do is I'll feather it, so bring back the feathering. But I'm actually quite happy with the feathering where it normally is, which is around about 50. Yep, that midpoint is pretty good. So all of the attention is on this centerpiece. Now there's one more technique that I want to show you for editing woodland images. But before we do that, I just want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. About 7 years ago, when I was looking at starting a website, I wanted just something simple where I could share my landscape images. I picked Squarespace because of how easy it was to set up, create pages and upload content. As I've grown as a photographer, the site has grown with me. So now not only do I share my images, but I promote my workshops, I share my YouTube videos, I've started a blog, and I also send out emails to people who have subscribed to my newsletter, all through my website. Being able to do all of this on the one platform is so convenient. It's fantastic. You can start your free trial at squarespace.com, where you can check out all the templates and start building pages, no credit card needed. And if you do check them out and you want to go ahead with a website, go to squarespace.com/Andrew Marr to get 10% off your first purchase. There's only one other adjustment that I want to make, and that is to some of the tree trunks. I think they're a little bit dark, and I just want to bring out a little bit of detail in some of those. So I'll grab a brush tool and I'll bring up the exposure. Not much, I'll come back and adjust it a little bit later on. And the shadows, I might just bring them up, say 10 or 15. I'll come back once I see what the effect is. I'll just change the brush size, and I'm just going to have a look at this trunk because it's one of the biggest. Here we go. And I'll just paint this effect on here. Now I don't know whether you're picking that effect up there, but it's a fairly subtle effect where I'm just bringing out some of the detail and textures in that trunk. It's looking pretty good. Now I'll just play around with the exposure here. Yeah, I don't want to overdo that, so maybe I'll just bring that back down to closer to 15 than 20. What I will do is I'm going to bring up the texture just a little bit. So if I just swing it back and forward, you can see the effect that it has. I don't want to go too overboard and bring in that sort of an effect. It's too overdone. So I'm just going to wind it all the way back to say 10, 11, 12, something like that. And then the clarity I'll also bring up maybe just a little bit more. Yeah, 15 or so. around about there, and that's pretty good. I don't want to overdo the bark and the shadows in the forest, but now I've set that brush, I can now go and paint out some of these other areas, and it just brings up some of the bark and textures, still keeping them nice and dark because that's giving it a natural look, but it's just a subtle little look there. Now, brushing in a little bit of extra texture and clarity with the brush tool is quite a common technique used in woodland photography. It works particularly well in woodland photography where you've got fog, so your background is going to be a little bit softer anyway because of the fog. It softens things, and then you bring in a little bit of extra clarity and texture and only paint it into the tree trunks of the trees that are closest to the camera. What that does is it just increases the little bit of separation between the trees and the background. Now, it doesn't work here as well because we don't have any fog in this one, but of course the background is quite light and it's got that softened effect that I've already introduced in those previous adjustments. So bringing in a little bit of clarity and texture into the barks of the trees in the foreground is actually going to be quite effective, and it's going to bring out those tree trunks just a little bit more in the image. So that's pretty much it. I can continue adjusting this and tweaking the image, but that's pretty much the image the way that I liked it. Let's go back to the first image that I took and let's see how close I got. Looks like I made the first image just a little bit warmer than the second one. I pretty much like both of them, but I could easily make that second one a little bit warmer by adjusting the warmth in either the global adjustment or going back to one of the targeted adjustments, the ellipse tool, and bringing up the warmth there. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got something out of the video, a trick or a technique that you could use in your next woodlands image when you're editing it, or in a shot where you've got some backlight that are illuminating some leaves. This is a really effective technique that really makes the most of it. If you've got any feedback, then leave them in the comments below. I love reading the comments from you guys. I hope you're finding an opportunity to get out there and shoot some images for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.